Keir Starmer was left squirming during PMQs, as Kemi Badenoch relentlessly grilled him for appointing a convicted criminal as Transport Secretary. Despite repeated demands for clarity, Starmer dodged every question, refusing to explain why his controversial appointee was advised to resign. Now, watch this heated exchange, as Badenoch exposes Starmer for betraying the British people to favour union allies, while he scrambles to avoid accountability.
The Prime Minister knowingly appointed a convicted fraudster to be his Transport Secretary. What was he thinking?
Mr. Speaker, the previous Transport Secretary was right when further information came forward to resign. What a marked contrast to behaviour in the last 14 years. And she talks about immigration, record levels of immigration under the previous government, nearly 1 million. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one urging on the removal of the caps for work visas. She was thanking the previous Home Secretary for the work that was done. She championed it, she advocated it. Record numbers of immigration.
Mr. Speaker, he's obfuscating, but I'm going to keep him on the topic. He owes the House an explanation. He said that the former Transport Secretary was only asked to resign after further information came to light. What was that further information?
I'm not going to disclose private conversations. Further information came to light. The Justice Secretary resigned. As I say, what a marked contrast. But whilst she's obsessing with the Westminster issues, we're getting on with fixing the mess, fixing the foundations, that £22 billion black hole, our prisons bursting, Mr. Speaker, as we found out last week, nearly 1 million net migration numbers because of the Tory open borders policy.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not asking about migration. I'm asking about the former Transport Secretary. He never answers any questions. He never answers any questions. And it looks like he didn't ask his Transport Secretary any questions either. The truth is, he appointed a person convicted of fraud to the Cabinet. The first thing she did was bung hundreds of millions of pounds in pay rises to her trade union friends. Wasn't this a fraud on the British people?
No, Mr. Speaker, she says she's not talking about immigration. I'm not surprised. And I advise her and all them not to talk about the economy or immigration for another 5 years.
Mr. Speaker, you can try and change the topic as much as he likes, but the public are watching. He owes them an explanation. The country needs conviction politicians, not politicians with convictions.
As Badenoch rightly said, the country needs conviction politicians, not politicians with convictions. Starmer's inability to answer the questions only raises further suspicion. Instead of addressing the issue at hand, Starmer deflected, choosing to talk about immigration and other unrelated topics in an attempt to shift the spotlight onto the Conservatives. Has he forgotten his greater responsibility to address concerns as the current Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? Now, pay attention as the discussion moves to the larger elephant in the room.
Now on to an even bigger fraud. Yes. Now on to an even bigger fraud, the budget. Last week, the Prime Minister failed to repeat the Chancellor's pledge of no more borrowing and no more taxes. It is obvious that they are coming back for more. In his manifesto, he committed to making Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7. Does he stand by his own pledge?
Mr. Speaker, I gently remind her that 2 of her predecessors had convictions for breaking the COVID rules. I'd also invite her to look at the OECD report of this morning, which has upgraded growth for next year and the year after, which now puts us on target to be the highest growing major economy in Europe in the next 2 years. She should welcome that.
Mr. Speaker, I saw the OECD report, and what it said was that they will be coming back for more taxes. And I think the whole House would have heard him fail to repeat his own pledge. He can't even repeat the pledges that he made just a few weeks ago. We are here to stop him from damaging the economy, and that is why we are
I want to hear the question. Can we burn up?
Mr. Speaker, they are laughing the same way they all laughed during the budget when they talked about raising NI. They have no idea what people out there are dealing with. And that is why yesterday we voted against his damaging jobs tax. Even former supporters, Chef Tom Carriage, who endorsed Labour at the election, said that the budget was catastrophic. He built a real business employing young people, unlike his cabinet of trade union stooges, CV embellishers, and an actual fraudster. None of them have ever run a business. Why, when he listened to business who are saying his budget is catastrophic?
Mr. Speaker, I thought the scripted jokes were over, but we had another one about lectures about the economy from the party opposite. They broke the economy, mortgages through the roof, and a £22 billion black hole. And she talks about national insurance. She complains about the rise in national insurance week after week. But then 2 weeks ago, she says that she wouldn't reverse it. She signed trade deals, Mr. Speaker, that had farmers protesting in Whitehall. Now she pretends that she's their champion. She campaigned to remove the cap on migrant worker visas, and now she pretends she's furious about the open borders policy of the last government.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is the Prime Minister has discarded his own Labour leadership promises. He's dropped the 5 missions he said would define his government. He's ditched his pledge to make Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7. We left office with UK the fastest growing economy in the G7. And business is saying he has damaged the economy with his budget. Tomorrow he's going to have an emergency reset, Mr. Speaker, just 5 months into his premiership. But why should anyone believe a word he says?
Yeah! Keir Starmer's promises are falling apart, and his latest budget disaster shows just how bad things have gotten. Starmer has gone back on his pledge to make Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7, and businesses are calling his budget a total failure. His cabinet, filled with union allies and even a convicted fraudster, is out of touch with what the country needs. Starmer keeps trying to blame others, but the damage he's done to the economy and trust in his leadership is impossible to ignore. It doesn't even seem like he's concerned with the well-being of any citizen, including the elderly and the vulnerable. He recently refused to meet a 99-year-old World War II veteran who travelled 5,000 miles to see him after she had £60,000 wiped off her state pension, a result of the government's failure to properly assess her case. When asked about it during the PMQs, Starmer simply brushed it off.
In the gallery today is Anne Puckridge, who is a World War II veteran and an intense campaigner. She's flown over 5,000 miles from Canada to meet the Prime Minister to discuss the frozen pensions, a policy denying her and 500,000 Brits who live abroad a frozen pension. I'm sure Anne won't mind me saying that she will be 100 years old in a couple of days' time. Would the Prime Minister reconsider his decision, give Anne the best birthday present ever, and meet with her to discuss this issue?
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this issue. I think he will well know and understand that our position is in fact a continuation of the position under the last government.
Anne Puckridge, who celebrates her 100th birthday this month, has had her pension frozen since 2001 when she retired and moved to Canada to be closer to her family. She is one of nearly 500,000 British pensioners whose pensions were frozen at the level they received when they left the UK. Currently, Mrs. Puckridge receives just £72.50 a week instead of the £169.50 she would have received if she had stayed in Britain. This week, she travelled from Calgary, Canada, to Westminster to lobby the government and request a meeting with Keir Starmer. However, her request was declined due to said pressures on his diary. Instead, Pensions Minister Emma Reynolds met with her, according to the BBC. Mrs. Puckridge described the meeting as bitterly disappointing and disgusting, saying that while Ms. Reynolds was polite and kind enough to spend time with them, it seemed that her mind had been made up before the meeting even started. During World War II, Mrs. Puckridge served in an air defence unit and decoded messages as an officer in the Women's Royal Indian Naval Service. She lived and worked in the UK until the age of 76, paying all her taxes, including national insurance. Over 23 years, she estimates she has lost approximately £60,000 due to the lack of inflation adjustments to her pension. She said, My request to the Prime Minister that he meet with me is not for my personal benefit, but is a request made on behalf of more than 450,000 frozen pensioners around the world suffering as much, and in many cases far more than me. Once so very proud of being British, I now feel ashamed of my country. A petition urging Keir Starmer to meet with her gathered over 130,000 signatures, and 32 UK parliamentarians signed a pledge calling for the Prime Minister to meet the veteran. Her supporters include actress and activist Dame Joanna Lumley, who stated, "Times may be tough and challenging. But I urge the powers that be to be mindful that many of those affected by this cruel policy served Britain through even tougher times. I think swathes of the country will find it simply unthinkable that brave men and women such as Anne should be treated this way." Tonia Antoniazzi, Labour MP for Gower and a long-time advocate for ending the frozen pensions policy, criticised the government's stance. She explained, "The more I hear about this policy, the more indefensible it becomes. For decades now, successive governments have hidden behind figures from the DWP suggesting that righting this great wrong would cost billions. That is simply not the case. The pensioners are only asking for uprating from this point going forward. Campaigners estimate that uprating on such a going-forward basis would cost about £50 million in the first year, a tiny proportion of the overall pensions budget. In Treasury terms, that's a small price to pay to address such a great and long-standing injustice that's hit generations of pensioners. In all conscience, how can any of us look someone like Anne Puckridge in the eye and not feel that she deserves better?" A Department for Work and Pension spokesperson responded, "We are deeply proud of our veterans and their families for the contribution they make to our country. Theirs is the ultimate public service, and their professionalism and bravery is rightly respected across the world. We understand people move abroad for many reasons, and we provide clear information on how this can impact their finances in retirement, with the policy on the uprating of the UK state pension for recipients living overseas a long-standing one. This situation is nothing short of disgraceful. Anne Puckridge, a war hero who gave her service to Britain, has been let down by the very country she helped protect. It's unacceptable that someone who has lived, worked and paid taxes in the UK for decades should now be left struggling with a frozen pension simply because she chose to spend her final years closer to family. Keir Starmer's refusal to meet with her shows a shocking lack of compassion and respect. If the government claims to be deeply proud of its veterans, it's time to prove it with action. Reversing this unjust frozen pensions policy is not only the right thing to do but also a feasible one. Other countries ensure that their pensioners receive inflation-adjusted payments regardless of where they live. Why can't Britain do the same? These veterans fought for their country. Now, it's time for the country to fight for them. Do you agree? If you do, kindly give this video a like to show your support and share your thoughts in the comments. If you want to stay informed on issues shaping the UK, this channel is the place for you. In each video, we tackle the most important discussions that affect the future of the country. Be sure to subscribe and stay up to date by hitting the notification bell. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.